Hi, you're listening to the Heidi Rew Show podcast or watching it on YouTube. It's a place where you'll hear compelling stories from female leaders, creators, and innovators. And today's guest, well, she covers all of those bases and more. She's pretty legendary. Monica Pearson is my guest today. She was the first woman and African American to anchor the nightly news in Atlanta. She anchored at WSB for 37 years. She's won over 33 Emmy Awards. She ended up retiring in 2012, but that did not stop her at all. She went on to get her master's degree at the University of Georgia in broadcast journalism. And then she also still hosts a Sunday show on KISS 104.1 FM. She's one of the 3 hosts for the Georgia Public Broadcasting show, A Seat at the Table, and we talk about that a little bit on the interview. She's also been inducted to more Hall of Fames than I have ever heard of anyone being inducted to. The National Association of Black Journalists Hall of Fame, the Georgia Broadcasters Hall of Fame, Georgia Music Hall of Fame, and like several more that I could keep on listing. She's not only has she accomplished so much in her career, but she gives back not only on a big scale. She's on the board of directors of Meals and Wheels, but also if you have met anyone that knows Monica, then they more than likely will have a story of how she's given to them in some shape or form. She also has encountered a lot of challenges in her life. She is a breast cancer and a liver cancer survivor, and we talk a little bit about that and how she developed this resilience. One of the things that we didn't get to in the interview was I didn't get a chance to really tell Monica that she actually really inspired me. I grew up watching her on the news, and going into college, that's what I wanted to do, was to be a reporter and to go into news. And she was one of my inspirations for doing that. My path changed a little bit, and I ended up getting into radio instead, which I still love. But she is just an incredible person, and I know for a fact you are going to be inspired by her story as well. In fact, so much so that we're having to divide the interview up into 2 weeks because there was so much to unpack in this interview. And so you're going to hear part of the interview today, and then we'll release a second one next week. So let's talk to Monica. So Monica, do you attribute, or maybe what do you attribute, the way that you grew up to this incredible legacy and the grace to which you've lived your life?
Good question, because I'm not really sure where you want me to go with it.
I think that I want to know, you live your life so well. You've done so much and you've given to so many people. What gave you that courage and that bravery to pursue all that you've done? Was it the way that you grew up? Was it something instilled at you at a young age? Or do you think that it was just something inside of you that you always had?
I think most of my success comes from 2 people, my mother and my father. Even though they divorced when I was very young, my mother and her sayings I call Hattieisms always would say things like, it's what you do with what you have that makes you what you are, that each of us is born with certain talents and skills. The problem is we have to identify them and then we have to grow them. And if you're blessed enough to have someone in your life who recognizes what your skills are and what your talents are, and they help you develop them, then, of course, you become a success. Right. But if no one recognizes them, then what happens? You hope you find them on your own. In my case, I was very blessed I had a mother who knew I was basically an entertainer from a very early age.
Really?
It's so funny. She used to tell the story that when I was born a month early, she said I was always in a hurry, that when I came out of the womb and they hit me, there was this deep guttural cry, and she thought there was something wrong with her baby because the voice was so low. And the doctor said, "Oh, don't worry, she'll be a contralto singer." And from that moment, Mother said she knew that that was going to be my life, something where I would be working with people constantly. And she was right. When I was little, she had me in Jewel McNear's Dancing Doll. I'm from that generation of Black children who you went to dancing school. You learned to tap, you did ballet, you did all of that. So you learned to perform at an early age.
Yeah.
And my mother was Catholic, but had been raised Baptist. So I was Catholic, but also what they call Catholic Coastal, in the sense that my mother would send me to vacation Bible school at the Baptist church. So there I learned a whole different kind of music in addition to what I was hearing at the Catholic church. But also part of going to that Baptist church was you had to stand up and you had to recite poems and you had to give speeches. That was required of you back then. So when I look at my life, I look at the things my mother saw literally from the moment I came from the womb, and then she developed them. Now, I told you that my parents divorced, so my father was not in my life really until I was much older, almost an adult. And I think that that had a bearing too, because I always felt like, how could you leave the person you created? So I'm going to show you what a big mistake you made by being the most successful person I can be, so you'll regret having left me. And I think those two things together help build who I am.
Yeah.
Now, I will also say through counseling, I learned that was the wrong way to think.
Yeah.
But I will admit that if he hadn't left, I don't know how successful I would have been, because not only was my mother supporting me, but then I had this thought in my mind, if you can go away and raise another family, I'm going to be more successful than all of your kids.
Wow. And what is your relationship with your dad? I mean, was that
He died several years ago. Now it's been almost 10 years. And we really didn't get to know each other until I guess I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
And at that point, it was a case of he was a friend, but he was never a father. And I will tell you, when he got very, very ill, my half-sister called me. There are 2 girls and I think 3 boys, but I don't have a relationship with them because they lived in another city.
Sure.
And never the twain shall meet. But she called me and said, Dad's in the hospital. He's dying. I am the child that looks most like him, that his sister said. My Aunt Corrine, she and I share a birthday, October 20th. And she said he's dying, but he's holding on for some reason. And I said, you know what? I know what it is. I'll call you back later. And I literally went very quietly into a room, said a prayer, and told him, I forgive you. You didn't know how to be a father. You didn't know how to be married. He died within the hour. It was like he was waiting for forgiveness.
Wow.
Yeah, and he needed that. And I went to the funeral with my aunt and with my cousins, and saw his wife and my half brothers and sisters. But that's the only relationship we've had since then.
Did you feel free when you did that, or was that
I had
something
freed
that you
myself
felt
long ago? But
he needed to
hear that, and that was the way I think he heard it.
Wow. Did he ever come to you and say, wow, I am so proud and impressed?
No, he never said he was proud, and he never said he was sorry, but that's okay because I had reconciled that.
Yeah.
My mother and I had reconciled that. And I will say that's one nice thing about Hattie. She never said anything against him. She said, let his actions speak for him.
Wow.
And I tell that to a lot of women that I meet who are, browbeating their former husbands or their former partners or the father of their children. They're doing more harm to the child than what they think, because the reality is the child will find out through their interactions with that other adult whether or not they really are cared for.
Yeah.
So the best thing you can do is to be a support to that child and never say anything negative against the other person, because then it's a bad reflection on you.
Yeah. You entered into a field where there weren't other people that went ahead of you that looked like you.
Well, there were a
There a
few,
few?
but they were not. I can remember when I first did my first television show. It was a show called Hayloft Hoedown. It was a country music show. I used to sing all the time, and so I guess I would have been the black female Charlie Pride on Hayloft Hoedown. Randy Atcher actually was the big star of the program, and his the guy named who was a comedian later on, Brooks. Oh, why can't I think of his name? But Tom Brooks, I think.
Okay.
His brother was also on the show. Tom Brooks went on to
Wow.
be a national figure, and then his brother was on the show in Louisville, Kentucky. So that was fun, being the only black person
Yes.
singing country music on a show that was Hayla Holat. And when I tell people that, they always look at me. I say, oh, I know a lot of Patsy Cline. I know old country, not much new country. And then when I went to the University of Louisville, my degree is actually in English and philosophy, but I dropped out in my sophomore year to get married. And then went back to school years later. But I got a job in a bank that was across the street from a newspaper. And that's what actually got me into the business originally, in the newspaper business. After the riots in 1968, after Dr. King's assassination, a lot of the white-owned media turned around and said, we don't have any black folks in here. And the reason that happened is because when they sent white reporters into those riot-torn areas, black people didn't trust them.
Right.
So they said, we need to do something about this. So in 1968, Columbia University in New York and the Ford Foundation started the summer program for minority groups. And they brought in journalists from all over the country, or people who wanted to be journalists, and trained them for a summer and then sent them back. I started out in newspaper in 1969. I was selected for the program, went back to the Louisville Times as a reporter, although originally when I left the bank, I had gone to the Louisville Times as a newsroom clerk. So my way into the business was actually through newspaper. But I laugh because I look back as a teenager, not only was I doing Hayloft Hoedown, but I also wrote for the Louisville Defender, which was the black newspaper there. And I was always in contests, beauty contests, doing that kind of thing. So I think, as my mother said from the beginning, I've always been someone who liked to engage people and at times entertain people. But when I looked at television back then, it never occurred to me to do television because I didn't see people like me doing it.
Yeah.
I can remember, turning on the news and not seeing people who look like me, but I saw white women doing it.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing was those white women who were doing it were either weather girls, not meteorologists. They were called weather girls. And then you had people like a woman named Phyllis Knight, who worked for WHAS TV and did a thing called Crusade for Children, which was a fundraiser, and she was a talk show host. But again, I didn't see anybody who looked like me doing news until I saw Ed Bradley on CBS Evening News. And then it was like, oh. And then Michelle Clark, who the summer program for minority groups later was renamed for. She was a reporter for CBS and was killed in a plane crash. And then it was kind of like, okay, yeah. So when I got the job in Louisville working for WHAS, I started out as a reporter and then weekend anchor. What I didn't realize at the time and learned many years later that there had never been a black woman anchoring in the city of Louisville at that time, but I didn't know that. So when I got a call from consultant saying WSB TV in Atlanta was looking at, quote, integrating the set, because at that time there were 4 white men on the set. They wanted to interview me. Funny story about that. The TV station I had applied to get a job, WAVE in Louisville, told me I would never work in television, that I didn't look right, I didn't dress right, I didn't have the personality, I needed to stick to newspaper. And then after taking a charm course where I learned to do hair and makeup and smile and learned to write for television, I got the job at WHA.
Wow.
Which was a competitor. And our ratings were so good that Wave actually gave a tape of me to their consultant, which was Maggot. Maggot was a consultant for WSB, and they invited me here for an interview.
Oh, my goodness.
What I learned years later after I got the job, that there were 3 finalists for the job. Jane Pauley, Oprah Winfrey, and me. I always laugh and say, what if I hadn't gotten the job? Where would I be? But God puts you where He wants you.
Yes.
But it's like, golly. And every time I would see Oprah over the years, when I would interview her, she would go, you got my job. And I'm like, I think you're doing okay.
I think you're okay.
I think you're okay.
You made it okay.
Did fine. So when I got into the business, yes, there were not a lot of people like me, but Jocelyn Dorsey was doing the news here and had anchored the noon show here. I often ask Jocelyn, why didn't you get that opportunity for the 6 o'clock news? Because you were here. And she quite honestly said to me, she said, 1, they thought I was too militant. She said, and I was surprised. I said, well, you were anchoring the noon show. She said, yeah, but I really spoke up a lot. And she said, then two, I have to be honest. She said, and I said this to her, I said, you're being very, how shall I say it, humble. But the reality is they couldn't afford to have your reputation ruined if you failed on the 6 o'clock news. That would also affect their noon show. They couldn't put you back. Whereas if you bring in somebody from the outside, if they fail, you haven't lost anything. And she always said, oh, that's not true. I said, no, I really believe that is the truth. I don't think it had anything to do with militancy.
Yeah.
I think it had to do with protecting what your best asset.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you think that you got the job, even over Oprah, too?
I have no reason why. I wish I knew. It's just divine intervention. Maybe I was the cheapest. Maybe what I asked for, salary was the lowest. I have no idea. The only person who could answer that question would be Don Elliott Heald, who was the general manager at that time. But he's now passed. But it's really funny because when I came here, the city was like, ooh, this is quite something different from Louisville.
Yeah.
I miss Louisville because of the river, the Ohio River, right in the heart of the city. And then you come here.
We just have the Chattahoochee.
Oh, you guys, the Chattahoochee. And the Chattahoochee is not a river that you live on. You go play on it. Whereas it is a working river, and homes are along the Ohio River. But when I came here, I was surprised at how segregated the city still was, coming from Louisville. We had integration. We had our problems. We had busing. But the city was pretty much integrated. And here, I can remember looking for an apartment and having a hard time finding one and realizing it was because of the color of my skin. And then when I finally started mentioning that I was going to work for WSB TV, all of a sudden doors started to open.
Wow.
It was really a very different time.
Don't forget to tune in next week to the second half of my chat with Monica Pearson. Thanks so much for watching this episode of the Heidi Rew Show podcast. Don't forget to subscribe so you can catch the next one, and make sure you hit that bell. And if you'd like to listen via the podcast platforms, you can find those below. We would love to hear from you. Join in on the conversation on Instagram or Facebook. And I hope this episode encouraged you. Don't stop, get it, get it.